Welcome to the Master Lecture by Dr. John Fantuzzo, the Albert M. Greenfield Professor of Human Relations from the University of Pennsylvania's Graduate School of Education. We're both so delighted to see so many of you here. I'm going to tell you a little bit about John, and then I'm going to share a story. Dr. Fantuzzo is a national leader in school-based early childhood education research to enhance the well-being of children from low-income households. He has been involved in many foundation, state, and federally funded research projects that have involved extensive work with the City of Philadelphia and the School District of Philadelphia's early childhood programs, building sustainable research and service capacities. In addition to his partnership with the City of Philadelphia, he has conducted research for the Pennsylvania State Office of Child Development and Early Learning, examining the state's quality rating improvement system and kindergarten readiness assessment. He serves on the editorial boards of major research journals in education and early childhood. Currently, Dr. Fantuzzo is director of the Penn Child Research Center at Penn GSE and the co-director of the Actionable Intelligence for Social Policy, which has grown into a national network of cities and states sharing their strategies for using data most effectively for informing policy and programming. This invitational lecture is a celebration of John's nearly 4 decades of partnership-based research with Head Start and other early childhood programs and his indelible impact on the field. My name is Christy McWayne. I'm a professor and director of early childhood education at Tufts University. And where I am today professionally is largely because of John's incredible mentorship. I truly owe my career to him, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about John today. John's impact on the field has primarily occurred because of his commitments to 2 relational contexts: his genuine and collaborative research partnerships with early childhood practitioners, administrators, and policymakers. And second, through his mentorship of his students, many who are in this audience and represent several generations of his legacy, because as those of us who have had the privilege of working with John know, his mark on our lives and the heart of our work is permanent and generative, impacting our students and partnerships, their students and partnerships, and their students and partnerships to come. I am often reminded of the Maya Angelou quote when I think of John: "When we cast our bread upon the waters, we can presume that someone downstream, whose face we will never know, will benefit from our action." From all your mentees in this room and elsewhere, that is a promise we can give to you. So, that I don't cry, and to stick with the water metaphor, John has pursued many different streams of his work with Head Start and other ECE agencies over the years. His early work was with children suffering from serious emotional and behavioral difficulties, for which he developed the Covenant House, a residential facility for children in California, and continued that work when he moved to Rochester, New York, with the Mount Hope Family Center. He then began his work with Head Start programs in Santa Ana, California, in 1986, where he conducted research on the effects of domestic violence and abuse and neglect on young children. John also began conducting intervention work around children's social emotional competence, which continued when he came to the University of Pennsylvania in 1988. This intervention work built on the strengths of Head Start staff and parents, and on those of young children in the most vibrant learning context occurring in preschool classrooms, that of play with their peers, to benefit the most vulnerable children, those who were withdrawn from the classroom learning environment. Responding to Galileo's call that Kathy Ayub shared with us this morning at the University of Pennsylvania, John also began his important measurement development work on constructs such as family engagement, parenting, children's social behavior, and approaches to learning, among others, measures that are used nationally and internationally today. In the 2000s, John and his colleagues implemented 2 major initiatives. With the School District of Philadelphia, they launched and tested a large-scale integrated curriculum, EPIC. And with the City of Philadelphia, he led the creation of an integrated data system for the purpose of informing actionable intelligence on behalf of children and families, which led to the establishment of the Penn Child Research Center and IASP. He will be speaking in much more detail about those lines of research today. For his work in true partnership with communities in Philadelphia, he was the recipient of the Martin Luther King Jr. Community Involvement Award. And for his dedication to mentorship, he was the recipient of the National Head Start Research Mentor Award presented at this very conference. There is so much more I could tell you about John's impact on the field and his past and current work, but I'll close with a brief story. I tell this story because it is so illustrative of how John integrates the voice and perspective of the community in his research and mentorship. By doing so, his research and mentoring have been shaped by core values. Some of these are among them: learning to listen and to hear, responsive and responsible scholarship and community, focus on the integrity of the process of applied research, trust in the strength of partnerships and the critical importance of relationship building and reciprocal learning, and most of all, staying focused on what really matters, the impact that our work has for the benefit of low-income children and families. So for the story. My first field experience as a doctoral student researcher was supervised by a former Head Start parent and community leader who became an integral member of the Penn research team, Sabora Abdul Kabir. Some of you may know her. Sabora influenced a whole generation of John's students in different ways. When I became John's student, she had been working with him for quite a few years already. I remember countless conversations with her in the research office, how she shared openly her struggles and triumphs as a parent raising children in a low-income community. Sabora helped me understand what it was like to be a member of the Head Start community and how I, as a budding researcher, could engage with this community. Interestingly, one of my fondest memories of her now was part of a difficult process for me at the time. We had just begun our work collecting data in Head Start. One of our tasks was to call parents on the phone, explain the purpose of the project, and ask them to answer some questions. Okay, so I was pretty good on the phone. I could follow a script. I had a friendly voice. Surely this wouldn't be very difficult. We were to practice by role-playing with Sabora. She was actually at her home, and we called her up to go through the script, and then we would get her feedback. I will spare everyone the details of the phone conversation, though I do remember them vividly today. When she came into the office later that day, upon seeing me at the computer, she announced, "Well, you have failed miserably." I was shocked, then embarrassed, because I knew it was true. This was my first lesson in humility as a graduate student. But her mentorship did not end there. She helped me to appreciate my process from that first awful phone call drill to eventually completing my own partnership-based dissertation research with Head Start parents as members of the research team. And her impact on my work continues today because John created the context for that to happen. You see, Sabora's mentorship of all of us who were there at that time was part of the design of John's research team. Her wisdom helped to shape how I engage in conversation with parents about research, how I partner to incorporate their perspectives, questions, and concerns into the project design. And in the context of John's team, we all learned from each other and formed genuine relationships with one another, sharing our passions, triumphs, and yes, failures. Above all, we learned that not only is this hard work, but it is heart work. And we were being prepared by John for both. In my current research and moments of reflection, I ask myself if the process of our research lives up to the values that I learned during my time with John at Penn. The integrity of the work that he does is a yardstick against which I measure my own. It is a particular joy for me to introduce my mentor to this audience. As you will experience, John has this amazing way of connecting with you on a level you don't expect, challenging you and ultimately reminding you of your own values and commitments, and then providing the inspiration to reconnect with those values and commitments and to transform them into sustained action on behalf of children and families. He is the real deal. I'm just thrilled to invite you into a relationship with him today. I know you're going to learn a lot and you're going to have a lot of fun along the way. His talk today is titled "The Use of Child Outcome Data in Head Start. We Got to Get It Right." Please join me in welcoming Dr. John Fantuzzo.
Okay, thank you so much. It is very humbling to be giving this talk and standing on a booster seat. Because if I wasn't standing on this booster seat, you wouldn't see me behind this podium. Chrissy, thank you so much for your kind words, and I love you. I've never been in a master lecture series before. I've never been a master lecturer. At my church, White Rock Baptist Church in West Philadelphia, I sing in a men's choir called Masters of Song. I don't know if any of us are masters of song, but we really love to sing, and we really love to serve our church community. So I'm going to try to be that kind of master today. I'm going to try to give it all I got and do my best for you. But first, I'm just kind of humbled by the fact that I'm really in this incredible place with these incredible people, right? Where it's the right time, the right place, and the right people. And I just want to do, as a researcher, I want to do a tiny little experiment to prove that, okay? So I'm going to ask you 3 questions. Raise your hand if you love our beautiful Head Start children. Oh my gosh, look around. Look how many people love Head Start children. Okay, second, raise your hand if you are convinced that we can do more to get it right for them. Oh my gosh. What an effect size we're going to have here. Okay, now this one's a tricky one. I want you to raise 2 hands if you think making major improvements nationally in our current political climate ain't going to be easy. At this point, we would say hallelujah in my church. Okay, so recently, I was asked this complex and critical question by national and local Head Start leaders. They said, John, from your experience, how can we make better use of child outcome data? Okay, this question provoked a very strong response in me because it succinctly captured my life purpose to serve Head Start children living in challenging urban centers with all I got. It really actually, too, brought to mind my favorite Kierkegaard quote from Kierkegaard, which I'll put up on the screen. This is a kicker, right? Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. This truth is a charge to look back on your experiences and see what needs to be changed, then have the courage to move forward and change it. So today I would like to take this question and actually look backwards and forwards to basically try to answer this question for you. Focus on this question. I want to share with you the root of my life purpose. I want to identify for you what I see as the 3 critical dimensions of this question. And then I want to follow Kierkegaard's charge and look backward over 3 decades in Philadelphia and share with you what I've learned grappling with these dimensions. Then I want to look forward at the implications that I have learned from that would be appropriate for the National Head Start leadership and hopefully for the new director of Head Start. But before we start, we need some encouragement. I don't know about you, but at conferences, I really need some encouragement because you've just started, so you're not conference burned out yet. But it is fitting that we be encouraged from a 3-year-old. And this 3-year-old is going to help us get it right. Okay? So here is Chaz, who's my son-in-law, and Evangeline Love Howard, my youngest grandchild. Reverend Dr. Charles Howard is the chaplain at the University of Penn, and we collaborate on projects in West Philadelphia. And at a recent family event, we were in a deep discussion about children, and Evie was listening in. And Chaz kept saying emphatically, Dad, we got to get this right. Okay, we didn't realize it that we were inspiring Evie's first music video. So I'm happy to, actually with Anthony's help, I'm happy to show you how Evie is going to encourage us this afternoon.
You got it right. Yeah, you got it right. Yeah, you got it right. Yeah, you got Yeah, you got it right. Yeah, you got it right. Yeah, you got it right.
Okay, so you guys got it right? You know where we're going. Go Evie. Okay? She's ready. She's ready for her national debut. So, yeah, Evie, we're going to work to get this right. So, we got to start with who am I and what's my root purpose? John, why Philadelphia? John, why Head Start? It's going to be no surprise to you that my roots are in early childhood, right? Okay, so on July 24th, 1964, the neighborhood where I was born and raised exploded. It was a racial explosion that was set off by police maltreatment of an African-American young man at a street dance. The incident set off 3 days of bedlam in my neighborhood, resulting in deaths, hundreds of injured and arrested, and the presence of the National Guard to quell the conflict. This was the first time the National Guard was called out to a northern city for such a conflict. This was my childhood neighborhood in Rochester, New York, an unlikely epicenter of racial unrest and struggle. This neighborhood was originally an immigrant ghetto of segregated poverty and housing projects. During the first 10 years of my life, this neighborhood absorbed nearly all of the 300% increase of African Americans who migrated to Rochester from the South to work at Kodak and Xerox. The racial explosion was the culmination of escalating racial tensions over mistreatment, discrimination, and lack of opportunity for poor African Americans concentrated in this neighborhood. I too was a resident and product of this neighborhood. My grandparents and great-grandparents were poor Italian immigrants who settled in this neighborhood. I was a white child in a predominantly African American community, going to public school number 20 with mostly African American children. This traumatic event in July '64 was a turning point in so many ways for civil rights in the United States, for the city, and for the neighborhood, and for me. I was blessed to have a loving family and relationships with African American children and adults in my community and church who loved me and cared for me. Those who loved me helped me as a young child make meaning out of the fear and anger and hopelessness experienced by many in my community. Let me share with you a childhood memory. When I was in kindergarten, I had a best buddy. That was James. He was an African American boy. And James and I were notorious for always being in the wrong place at the wrong time. You see, in my neighborhood, race and place were very important. There were streets that James couldn't be on, and there were streets that I couldn't be on because of place. But James and I, we always were getting in trouble. And James told me about this wonderful big clump of dirt in front of one of the projects because they were doing some construction. And James said, we can bring our army men and we can have a wonderful time there. Yet both James and I knew it wasn't a street for a white person to be on. So we went. And we had such a great time. But while I was there, a young woman, a young mom, came out and she saw me and she pointed at me and she said, "What are you doing here? You need to get and you need to go and play with your own kind. Now you go, you get." Okay, so I had my tail between my legs and I picked up my army men, but there James was. James said to me, he says, "We're going." The closest thing to God in my neighborhood was James's grandmother. She was a deacon at one of the biggest Baptist churches in our community. He goes, "We're going to my grandma." And he took me to his grandma. And he was basically my attorney for the defense. And he was telling about the kinds and can't play with your army. And this wonderful, wonderful woman, she took me in her arms and hugged me. And she said, I can't say this without being emotional. She said to me, she said, "John, you have a kind heart, and that's my kind, and that's Jesus's kind." And I'm going to tell you how deep that went. How deep that went in terms of my understanding. So the loving kindness that I received from these incredible human beings around me. Over time, though, I began to see how the July 64 event and others were associated with social injustice that were distinctively experienced by African Americans living in distressed urban communities like mine. These early experiences of poverty, racial inequity, personal pain put me on a path with many twists and turns that eventually led me to become a professor at the Graduate School of Education at the University of Pennsylvania. Prior to coming to Philadelphia, I spent my early academic years, as Christy outlined, as a licensed clinical psychologist, conducting research with young victims of child maltreatment in specialized preschool settings, like Mount Hope. Though I was trained to use a mental health model, I soon rejected this focus on deficiency and disorder and embraced a developmental community model. I also made Head Start my strategic life focus, since it was the largest federal program intentionally serving young children in poverty with a developmental ecological model. I sought a position at Philadelphia intentionally, because Philadelphia is the largest of the 10 poorest cities in the United States, and it has deep poverty. Its demographics were very much like those of my Rochester neighborhood. I was eager to develop close ties with community leaders and public service providers, serving young children living in poverty, and I was also blessed to eventually become a community leader in West Philadelphia as an ordained deacon at the White Rock Baptist Church. You see how that influence of that deacon impacted me? Oh, Lord have mercy. In Philly, I sought out the largest local Head Start program to serve. I loved the stated mission of Head Start, to create opportunities for those beautiful young lives to flourish. I have devoted my adult life to making visible the beauty of Head Start children and contributing to any process that would bring this beauty to full manifestation. And so this Rumi, the poet Rumi's quote, captures this. Let the beauty of what you love be what you do. Okay, that's who I am. And now we want to take a look at tackling that question. So we're going to take a look at this question. And I basically see this question as having three distinct dimensions. They represent critical components of Head Start's mission to serve as an effective vehicle to get young children from low-income households to school readiness. In Philly, I spent nearly half of my life grappling with these three dimensions. I want to go through each dimension and discuss with you the significance of each dimension, my struggles with each dimension, and how one struggle led to another struggle, which led to another struggle. I hope you will forgive my Baptist deacon vernacular, but I call these struggles come to Jesus moments. Okay? And you can take a look at the Urban Dictionary for a come to Jesus moment. A critical moment of truth, an epiphany where one realizes the truth of a matter, its essential meaning, realizing the truth and impact of a negative situation or failure, a moment of decision. And each of these moments of truth really, come back here. Each of these moments of truth really set me on a research path. And I'm going to talk to you about how a moment of truth set me on a research path for a decade until another moment of truth altered my trajectory. Okay? And these three dimensions really nail me and really have it clear. So let's start with the first dimension. Of course, researchers are going to go after this dimension. This is sort of like where we kind of start, because this is the central point of the question. It's literally the central point of these dimensions. Its significance is huge. Okay, so this dimension, child outcome data, we're going to unpack it a little bit. So this dimension confronts a context of a lot of doing in Head Start. With all the many regulations and standards operating historically, Head Start has a lot of doing going on. Over the years, doing has been followed by more doing as regulations have accumulated. Now, you're not to interpret this as doo-doo, okay? Okay, I just want to advise you, it's not doo-doo. It's just a lot of doing, okay? So this dimension is centrally positioned. This dimension creates the central learning system in Head Start programs, where knowing is guided is guiding doing and shaping doing, building and using an evidence-based child outcome data models for each relevant outcome to ensure that we fundamentally know what we're doing. Okay, there's another way to look at it, and that is what we do and our desired outcomes. In the middle can't be a mystery box. In the middle must be, in the middle must be the child outcome data models. These are logical relationships that have connections between what you do and your desired outcome, right? That's kind of a dumb moment, okay? And then the data are very, very important because the data create the context for us to know how it is that we're doing and knowing what we're doing, okay? So I have this complicated definition, but I'm going to walk you through it because this dimension is really important. Evidence-based child outcome data models with a theory of change for each relevant outcome. Models show how all the diverse populations of children served will obtain desired levels of functioning on all multiple outcomes to meet the expectations of public school entry, the goal of Head Start. All models are made visible by the relevant scientifically valid data collected across time to document their effectiveness. Okay? All right, can you break that down a little bit more for us? So yes, theory of change and data are really critical in this definition. So we really could see theory of change as being really the engine of the vehicle and the data being the fuel that drives the engine. The engine is what translates the raw material into power to move the vehicle forward. Each relevant outcome has to got wheels and it's got to move forward, okay? But it is really complex. This is really complex. Let's take a look at this. Multiple outcomes. Anytime you have multiple of anything, how many people have one child? How many people have 15 child? Anytime you have multiple, it's complex. Okay, take one course, take 15 courses. Okay, it's complex. But then we have each relevant outcome. This should signal your developmental vocabulary, your developmental concepts vocabulary, because remember domain specificity? Domain specificity says that with each domain outcome, you have a different mechanism in order to operate change. So that means domain specificity says we have to have different data models for each of the outcomes. Ooh, we just had multiple outcomes. We've got to have multiple models, theories of change and data. Okay, then we've got this. Oh my gosh. All the diverse populations. Okay, remember another developmental concept? Equifinality, that says there are multiple pathways to the same outcome? Oh my gosh. We have multiple cultural and linguistic groups, all of which can't have the same pathway to early literacy. There must be distinctive pathways that we have to discover. And at this wonderful conference, you're going to go to a seminar after seminar that's going to tell you, here's how you do it for Latinos, here's how you do it for this population, here's how you do it. God bless them for that, but that adds complexity. And here's the kicker. Okay, no one should really be sad about this, but scientifically valid. What does that mean, honestly? It means that we have to be real. We don't want scientifically invalid measures because they'll screw up the whole model. We've got to be real. Valid means that what we're using is real. Okay? So, yes, this is rocket science. And yes, this is a tall order. So this brings me to my first come to Jesus moment. And that is my first decade in Philadelphia. My first decade in Philadelphia was focused on this dimension. So let me share with you my first come to Jesus moment. Oops, back up. This is a very active clicker. Being unaware and unresponsive of participants' realities thwart evidence-based discoveries of child outcome data models for relevant outcomes. When I first came to Philly, I was invited by Head Start director to write a grant, a university partnership grant. The Head Start leadership wanted to help them focus on enhancing social competencies in play, which was really the goal of Head Start at that time. Teachers needed extra support, she said, because subgroups of children who they thought were experiencing some type of trauma were struggling. I developed a grant proposal, got approval from all the people I was supposed to get approval from, and the grant was funded. Yay! Soon after this was announced, a group of parents were upset by the news. They believed the grant was about the government giving money to a strange white university professor to collect information on low-income black children so that they could be tracked by federal agencies. This group went to the media, congressional offices, demanding that the project be stopped. In fact, a group of parents were paying parents to say no to the research. They did not like the child measures that were being asked of parents and teachers to complete on their children. The director informed me. She brought me in. It was like a funeral. She brought me in and said the project had to stop. And I says, is there any recourse? She says, there's one chance. I could attend a special meeting where all the upset parents were meeting and assembled the press and all the advocacy groups in the city. Yeah, I'm going to go to that meeting, yes. She said that meeting would clearly be designed to kill the project once and for all. Well, like I told you, I'm a strange person. I go to places that I'm not supposed to go. I went to the meeting to face the accusations. See, I knew something that they didn't know. I knew who I was, and I knew why I was there. It was a major confrontation with folks shouting at me, what are you doing here? Heard that one before. Who are you? What do you have to contribute to me and my babies? I understood the subtext of these provocative questions. They were all about race and place, and a call from the parents for me to be real with them, to come clean. They said, we don't want you to exploit or publicize our weaknesses and ignore our strengths. I shared with them my heart, my Rochester neighborhood background, and what my true purpose in life was. I was vulnerable and real and partnered with their resistance. Both parents and teachers graciously embraced me and received me and then co-constructed with me a decade of research. Moving forward with the parents and teachers, we discovered major concerns about culturally and developmentally inappropriate measures that they were concerned about and being widely used in Head Start research and in Head Start. So what was the truth that we learned? The only genuine path to developing and using really scientifically valid measures and interventions for our child outcome data models is to ensure that we are aware of and responsive to our participants' resistance to our research agenda, informed dissent, and form a real partnership based on mutual respect to guide all the work. Here's a simple formula. Real leads to relationships. Real relationships leads to real problem-solving research, and real problem-solving research leads to real evidence-based child outcome models. Sounded really simple. So here's our decade, our first decade of research. We started out with no data models, widely used measures questioned. The first thing we did is we brought science to the measures that people had tummy trouble about, where they were upset about. We brought science to them, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And where they were lacking, we developed measures with them that were reliable and valid for their population. Then we used the intelligence from the measures to develop data models that we could use for intervention. Then we implemented and demonstrated, then we have the drill here. We implemented and demonstrated them in their real context, and finding them efficacious, we then put them forward. Finding them with some problems, we modified them. And then we also developed a dialogue between Head Start and DHS about those kids with some strange traumas. Okay, so what did it look like? It looked like this. We found matter of fact, the first call I got from Ed Ziegler was after one of these studies was published in Child Development, because it was actually one of his students whose measure I demonstrated was not reliable and valid for Head Start children. And boy, was she pissed at me. Ed, being who Ed is, called me up and said, go for it. But we found that a number of the measures were just not reliable and valid because they were developed on white suburban kids, and nobody cared to check their scientific integrity with our population. We found measures that were being used for a decade in funded research that were really not valid. We found a disregard, particularly for the respondents. So remember we said equifinality says people process things in different ways? Well, we had some response formats for direct assessments that our African American kids didn't process the way those urban suburban kids did. So again, it was not valid. They didn't lab test their measure. And then we found parents who were asked to complete measures where there was a latent meaning to some of the items that scared the bejesus out of the parents. So they didn't answer the measures. I'm looking at Marlo Perry. They didn't answer the measures honestly. Because why answer the measures honestly if they're going to create a threat for you and the researchers don't know otherwise? They don't know whether or not you answered honestly or not. They just will take their data and run. Okay, so we did that, and then we found out that we brought in the science of assessor variance, and we found that there was like 33 to 65% of the teacher and parent report measures were more about the teacher and the parent than they were about the child. Then we looked at measures that purported developmental sequences, those infamous 1 to 5 sequences. And we found out that we actually took a look scientifically, and we found that a third of the sequences for one widely used measure were inaccurate, where 5s were lower than 3s, lower than 2s in some case. Yikes! Okay, so then what we had to do is we then had to develop multi-dimensional measures, and then we worked for a whole freaking decade and more to develop them. Oh my gosh. Social emotional approaches to learning. I think we have the only multi-dimensional approaches to learning in the field. We have 2 of them. We developed direct assessments for literacy, observational measures. We were going wild. We were having a good time. And we had such wonderful partners. We had research parents on our research teams, and they, as Christy said, they kept us straight, and we had excellent teachers informing us. We then were able to use these to develop interventions. Then we were able to test the interventions and see if the interventions were found effective. With respect to DHS, we had the director of research for the Department of Human Services come to us and say, I love your intervention work in Head Start. I wish our maltreated kids could benefit from it. And I said, what do you mean? Aren't they in Head Start? He goes, no, they're not in Head Start. They don't get in Head Start. I says, is that true? I talked to the Head Start people. Says, well, we don't know. So we did the first integrated data study in Philadelphia where we integrated the big Head Start database with the Department of Protective Services database. And we found out, oops, they were right. There was a disproportionately low presence of the kids who most needed Head Start in Head Start. And we found barriers to that, and we basically looked to correct the barriers, because when we got the maltreated kids into the interventions, they did really, really well. But we didn't know that because of the lack of dialogue between, we just didn't know. Okay, so now we're on to 2 other dimensions. Okay, I'm moving right along. Can talk really fast if I have to. The central dimension is bracketed by 2 other very important dimensions. These dimensions mediate the central dimension. They represent 2 critical groups responsible for the actual operation of data models and all relevant outcomes. There are 2 sets of drivers of the vehicle. Use of are the local micro-level drivers of all the relevant child outcome data models operating in a single program. Those are all the people driving the data models in the program. National macro-level drivers of all the programs are operating in Head Start. It represents the national governance of Head Start. Those are all the macro-level drivers. So we're going to focus in for a minute on the use of, because it forms the second come to Jesus moment in the second decade of my work in Philadelphia. So what's use of? Okay, use of really means finding integral data models and integrating them as a whole. Okay, so this is basically Data models being operated by the local drivers functioning as a whole vehicle that's moving forward to achieve school readiness. It is the comprehensive picture of who is doing what, how, where, when in Head Start to implement and make improvements in the child outcome data models to move the vehicle forward. How the models are being used to guide all relevant decision making by all the local drivers. Decisions that the teaching teams are making in the classroom. Decisions that the coaches are making to support quality teacher interactions with children. Decisions to engage families to support children's progress. And decision that the directors are making to support all the program staff to use the model. Use of also recognizes how the program needs to integrate relevant child and family well-being data elements from outside the program. These are data elements on children's well-being relevant to achieving school readiness that are collected by local public service agencies in the community. Since the Coleman Report of the 60s, we have increasingly discovered that a major portion of the variance of school success is accounted for by factors outside of school, monitored by public service agencies. Therefore, we need an inter-system partnership that are necessary to integrate these important data elements into a more comprehensive whole. Okay? We get that? Now we come to the second decade and the second come to Jesus moment. This was a rough one. If separate evidence-based child outcome data models were not integrated into a standard practice of the whole, they were not used. Too many disconnected parts. You can't drive a carburetor. Manuals and trainings were conducted for the evidence-based assessments and interventions that were successful products of grants, but they were not incorporated into the whole routine use of Head Start. Since they were not routinely used by definition, they were not useful. They became academic publications and artifacts of grants. When the grant activity ceased, they went away, even though the folks were happy with the products and were pleased with the results. Good people, under the direction of university-based researchers, were cooperating and doing extra things supported by the grant to create good parts. But when the grant was finished, the extra things stopped and the parts went away. The parts were not intentionally integrated and made part of the practitioner's whole work, all the many things that Head Start staff are required to do. The whole overwhelmed the decontextualized parts. Connections made from a single project between Head Start and DHS were not maintained. No cross-agency, data-driven collaborations were sustained. Oh my gosh, this depresses me. Okay, so what was the truth? Ed Ziegler, one of my favorite quotes from Ed Ziegler, it is not that we do not know what to do. It's just that we do not know how to get people to do it. Well, this is partly true, Ed, but the full truth is that we know more about how parts of data models function, but we know less about how they function as wholes in real context. We cannot leave practitioners with the complex task of integrating all the parts together into a whole. We need to demonstrate use of evidence-based, integrated whole program models relevant to the whole child, the whole family, and to the whole program. Lord have mercy. People have to drive one vehicle. You got to put the parts together so they work and people could drive the vehicle. Oh, Lord have mercy. Too much not only is there a lot of doing, there's too much silo doing. This decade was bust the silos. Integrate. Whole child. We don't want to have program management that's based on data about a program. We want management based on data about each one of those delightful, wonderful people. That's what we needed. Okay? And so what we did, this was quite a decade. We put on 2 tracks, developing and validating the use of integrated evidence-based child outcome data models for the whole freaking program. That's a technical term, freaking. and build capacities in public service agencies to provide evidence to enhance programs' integrated model. So we took on two things. I was 6 foot tall before this decade. We developed EPIC and we developed KIDS. They were on separate tracks. It took us a decade for each. Okay? So let me take you through a little bit about what KIDS is and what EPIC is, and then we'll go to our final decade. Okay, KIDS, EPIC was the evidence-based program for integrated curricula. You kind of see that? I credit my colleague Paul McDermott. We called it EPIC because we had some foreshadowing of what kind of Homeric journey it was going to be. But when we started our journey, there were no separate data models being used, no integrated program. Our task was a task first to do an architectural design for the integrated domain-specific data models that we had already developed in the prior decade. Okay? We remembered them, even though people didn't use them, we remembered them. Okay? Then we had to, so that was the architecture, that was the machinery, that was the nuts and bolts we had to create. And I'm going to give you a little bit of a water ski over them. But then we had to make sure that the people were integrated, right? Because we're not just integrating models, we're integrating models and people. Then we had to field test with exemplars, and then we had to do the randomized control trial, which was gave new meaning to the word trial. Okay, so the thing that is exciting and makes this cumulative and progressive is that we had tremendous trust. We had earned trust from the decade before. We came out of that with them not using our stuff for the most part, but they loved us, and we loved them. And we found out who the real people were and who the people were generative and going to give. Parents and teachers and administrators. But they gave us the whole freaking program. So we weren't randomly assigned 100 classrooms out of the whole city of the 400 classrooms in Philadelphia. They gave the EPIC classrooms, we were going to be the program. We asked if we could be the program. We didn't want to do something that was going to be a layover on top of what they were already doing. They gave us the entire program. We were the professional development. We were the assessment. We were everything. They trusted us to build a better mousetrap based on our trust with them. Fortunately for us, the school district had spent $1 million buying one of those big packages to implement at the same time. So they were spending this $1 million on these other classrooms, which was our comparison group. So our comparison group was experiencing new plastic this and that, and they were given new professional development, and they were getting more money for their classroom. But we were asked and restricted to match, and we were happy to do that. We didn't use any more funds than the funds they were using. We didn't use any more professional time than they were using, and we only could use indigenous coaches and mentors. We couldn't put delightful, attractive men and women from Penn dancing around in these classrooms. We were restricted to using indigenous dear souls, which was great for us because that gave us the license to work with all these incredibly wonderful people. And so what did the architecture look like? So we were doing intra-system integration. We were inside one program, and we were integrating all the program components within. You got me? And it looked like this little flower, this little daisy. The horizontal axis was the integrated data models, the architecture of the integrated data models, and the vertical axis was the we's, the people, how we integrated the people. So what did this look like? Give us a bird's eye view. Okay, so we focused on integral outcomes. We didn't focus on all the outcomes because what? They were too many. We focused on what we felt were the strategic outcomes. Early reading, early math, approaches to learning, social emotional development. So we had to integrate them. Oh, that was a cute motion. Let's see if I can get that. Wow, that goes fast. Okay, so we had to integrate them into one model, one car. Remember the Volkswagen? Our scope for our curriculum were these three foci, and what we did is, remember, we had a decade's worth of studying to develop measures, And so we had all these wonderful measures, and we had the data across years for the kids, so we could actually use an evidence-based leveling for the curriculum. So we took a look at items that were easy, they became level 1, and across time we saw how kids changed in their skills. Level 5s, those were the more difficult things. Of course, they were going to come later in the curriculum development. So we provided an evidence-based for the levels of the curriculum. So we had a systematic sequence of skill development that was evidence-based. Then what we could do is do the alignment. Get all the math stuff, level 1s all lined up, and all the level 2s lined up, and kind of made sense, didn't it? It kind of made logical sense, because we were looking to create a 8-unit curriculum. And we're going to move across the curriculum, but we were going to center it on where the mean number of kids were across time. And we had the evidence for that, because we studied that evidence to form the basis for our data models. Okay? Sounds kind of semi-intelligent. Okay? And then what we did is we had the machinery. Now we had to put the ghost in the machine, the spirit in the machine. And of course, that's an early childhood classroom. All these incredible, beautiful classroom learning opportunities are amazing. They cover the Head Start Day. They cover the Head Start Week. They're wonderful. So we had to strategically, and here we were kind of dummies, we had to get these exemplary teachers to help us integrate the classroom, integrate the week, and position the lessons of effective and creative activities that were coming from these genius teachers. We robbed them blind because they were working with us. They're the co-authors of the curriculum. And we positioned them in time. But we positioned them with the level of difficulty of the level. So we moved those creative, wonderful activities across the curricular objectives to more complex things. Right? Because it's a logic, right? It's a logic, right? In the middle child outcome, it's a logic, so we had to be logical. The other thing we did is give intelligence to the teachers, creating the formative assessments and validated them, so that the teachers at any given point in time had a picture of their children with alphabetic knowledge. They could tell you what level every child was at. That intelligence allowed the teachers to level to make the curriculum serve the child. The child was the foot and the curriculum was the shoe, not the other way around. So the curriculum had to fit the child, not the child having to walk around in a poorly clad, poorly fitted shoe. You understand what I mean? So the teachers now could communicate. And what would you communicate in terms of alphabetic knowledge? If you're at a teacher-parent conference, the teachers would tell parents what a level 3 was, and tell them, what is it you think the parent wants to know next? What's a level 4? All the parents wanted to know what the level 4 was. Why? Because that's where they wanted to see their children grow. And we're all on the same page. And we sent home activities every week that were called home connections, where if you had a level 3 kid on alphabetic awareness, we basically showed you what you could do to help them get to level 4, right? Remember that little ZPD? We're going to come back to the ZPD in a minute. Zone of Proximal Development. Okay, we were working in the zone of proximal development for each child, but we created a systemic so that every child was experiencing this. Oh, it was so exciting. Okay? Then we worked on the wheeze, because at the center, what's at the center of this? Oh my gosh, child-centered. What's at the center? The integrated data model. Everyone was focused on where the child was at whatever level the child was at. So that meant family engagement had to be targeted to where the children's levels were. Okay? The parents didn't want their kids to be babysat. They wanted the kids to learn something. So we were telling them, okay, here's what you can do. And we didn't care about parents. We cared about families. Because sometimes it was big sister. Sometimes it was the Sunday school teacher who was working with us. We didn't care. Just someone who was actually able to provide more emphasis. We then worked with the professional development people. So what were the coaches doing? The coaches and mentors were working with the teachers to help them level the curriculum for their class. And to increase class, I can use class double entendre, and help them work on the teacher quality issues of the class with their class. Okay? We did a randomized control trial. It was an amazing thing. after a year of implementation, because we had the teachers, the exemplary teachers spend a year with Epic, no one else, and we were troubleshooting the curriculum. And we took the edges off, and the exemplary teachers, they polished it. Then we were ready to test it. We tested it. We had an effective, it's published, effective randomized control trial, and up against the comparison group, which was another major national package. And it was very, very exciting. Now I'm going to give you the decade on kids. Remember I told you that was the decade on Epic? Now we spend 10 years developing the first time ever building and using an integrated child well-being data model, first time ever in Philadelphia. This was the Kids Integrated Data System, one of the first citywide integrated data systems in the United States. How did this come about? One wonderful man whom I love, Ed Randell. Ed Randell, who was a graduate of Penn, came to the University of Pennsylvania, and he snagged Dennis Colhane and myself, we didn't even know each other at the time, and Ed said to us, you guys are working with different departments and doing different things. I want you to help me. I want to bust the silos from my child and family cabinet. I want these folks to go from a culture where they're reporting data for fiscal management to a culture where they're reporting data on progress that's being made on humans in my city. Oh my gosh, he was amazing. And he really got us going. So we basically, okay. Oh, my friend Anthony. One of our actionable intelligence for social network, our Los Angeles site. Of course, it's Hollywood, right? So they put together a wonderful little video that I want to share with you if some of you aren't familiar with integrated data systems. After you see this wonderful 2-minute thing, you're going to go out and want to buy one. Okay. So Anthony, can I click and could you run this video?
Children's experiences and environments between birth and age 5 are foundational to later good health, educational attainment, and overall well-being. At the Children's Data Network, we believe that by making better and smarter use of available data, we can ensure that more children grow up with the foundations needed for success. Throughout the life course, individuals generate data in the form of various records and documentation. When a child is born, health and demographic information is recorded. If that child is later referred for a developmental evaluation or receives early intervention services, other records are created. These records, called administrative data, are collected through distinct systems under the authority of different public agencies. The siloed nature of administrative data has long posed problems for policymakers, managers, and researchers. Information from a single agency provides a very partial picture of children's trajectories through systems over time. It cannot be used to determine the number of children concurrently served by 2 or more agencies, and it limits the identification of antecedent events captured in one data system that predict later outcomes observed in another. It is through a process called record linkage that information for the same individual can be integrated and used for research and evaluation. After records have been securely linked and anonymized to protect confidentiality, these data can be aggregated to generate rich epidemiologic information and answer important questions. Are nutritional supports during the first 5 years of life tied to later educational performance? Do children in foster care have unique health and mental health service trajectories? Does the receipt of early home visiting services lower a child's risk of abuse or neglect? Developing high-quality evidence for program and policy effectiveness is a strategy worth investing in for the long term. By making use of administrative records, the Children's Data Network can help us understand what makes our children, our families, and our communities healthier, safer, stronger.
Okay, isn't that amazing? That's what we started a whole revolution nationally to do, is to get Los Angeles as one of our sites. We used the model that we developed to help Los Angeles get to where Los Angeles is. So the point is, I want to give you a picture of what this trajectory was for this decade, and then we'll get to the next come to Jesus moment. So we started off with siloed data systems, just like in Head Start, there were siloed data models. Department of Human Services didn't talk to education. Education didn't talk to health. They were just doing their thing, getting their money from the federal government, and then saying it was all for fiscal compliance. Data were collected so that they can demonstrate that they served people, and then they got the money. So I always talk about this in terms of Piagetian stages of development. They were at the pre-operational stage, not the concrete operational stage. They were just collecting things and putting them in categories. The buttons go here, and again, the data were crap. Because they weren't using the data. Like most things that you don't use, they atrophy. So we basically went in there and said, oh, I don't think Dennis and I had any idea of what we were getting into. I don't know how many lawyers. I had to speak to a lawyer from every freaking agency. And I am telling you, I pray for lawyers, but so we had to develop the governance process for this in order for it to be sustainable. We had to develop the legal and ethical agreements that allowed us to say we were going to use people's information for beneficent purposes and not to shaft them or put their data on the internet. We then had to find in each data set, we had to find evidence-based elements. Like, for example, lead toxicity is an evidence-based element. There's a whole research literature showing that lead toxicity does bad things to children's learning. So we went and found, then the next thing we had to do is we had to make sure that the elements that we found did not suck as data. Remember that scientifically valid thing? We had to make sure that they passed standards of data quality. We found some really jazzy, sexy things in there, but we couldn't use because the data was really bad at that point. The data was bad. And then we told people how bad their data was. Oh, can you use our data element? No, it's bad. Oh, how could we improve it? Well, we'll show you how you can improve it. But right now it's bad. It doesn't make the team. Okay? So then what we had to do is the analytics, which people in this room are really experts at. We had to do really careful analytics because we wanted just to find the integral data elements. Not every freaking data element we could find, because it's too much and it's too complicated. So we had to do the analytics to find in our model those that contributed uniquely to the variance and those that contributed cumulatively to the variance. Okay, and we were able to do that. Oh, we had to then demonstrate. I'll get to that in a second. So we went to all these silos. All these silos were willing to participate. Some silos didn't want to participate with us, but as we got successful, they said, could we play? Because they were left out of the policy discussions. We found these data elements. These data elements were quality, they had an evidence-based, and they really hummed in our analytic models. I can remember our first press conference with the mayor and with the city presenting these prevalence rates. I was scared the bejesus out of the whole city because these prevalence rates are enormously high compared to the U.S. averages. Philadelphia is the poorest of the large cities in the United States. What do you expect? But when you make the power of data is that when you make a reality visible, it calls people accountable to it. So the whole city said, we got to do something and put resources toward early childhood. Well, these were all unique. Each of these risk factors was uniquely related to poor reading, math, early poor reading, math, and behavioral outcomes in school. With each additional risk, 30 to 50% were less likely to meet proficiency. 30 to 40% were less likely to be engaged in their classroom. They were less likely to be attending school. So we had some powerful, good data model. We looked at the 3 and 4 population, the whole population. Over 50% of them had over 50% of the population had one of these deadly risk factors, and 1 out of 5 had more than 2 or more. Okay, so this was a wake-up call for the city. We were then able to use the data model to demonstrate. We had to demonstrate its use because we needed political and economic sustainability. So we had to show folks that we got commissioned by the mayor, commissioned by city council to look at lead toxicity, homelessness and housing, maltreatment. We produced briefs, we produced reports, we published papers. We went and did dog and pony shows for everyone, and we really changed policy and practice, and I can tell you how we did that. It's a very exciting decade, okay, very exhausting, but exciting decade. Now let's go on to our third and final dimension while I still have you in consciousness. Okay. We already talked about this one. I think this is the most important one. Okay, this is the macro system drivers. This is the national governance of all local program operation. Like we're in the belly of the beast right now, Washington, D.C. The national governance leadership is ultimately responsible for creating the demand and supply to help programs use evidence-based data models to drive decision-making to ensure that all Head Start children reach their school readiness destination. If the local program staff and administrators are the driver of the vehicle that the children are in, then the national governance are the drivers of the whole transportation system, including all vehicle, fuel, driver, and driving standards related to the use of child outcome data models. Moreover, they are responsible for all the decisions related to the development of the policy, implementation of the policy, evaluation of the policy, and continuous quality improvement of the policy. So they're freaking important. Remember I told you freaking is an important word here. So where our first decade was building it with a vision of use, and our second decade was integrating and using it effectively, our third decade is institutionalize it. Make it a standard routine practice. Okay, our last and final come to Jesus moment, which I know you all have been waiting on bated breath for this moment. Here's our last come to Jesus moment. To institutionalize use of evidence-based integrated child outcome data model or not. To be or not to be. This involved a decision by executive leaders as to whether they would invest in a process to institutionalize use of a successfully demonstrated whole model. KIDS was institutionalized, EPIC was not. Both the EPIC and KIDS were effectively demonstrated to be useful evidence-based integrated outcome models. The next logical step was the decision to institutionalize the model. That is, to make a decision to move forward in partnership and invest in a scaffolded process of building capacities necessary to make the use of the demonstrated model a sustainable part of the whole system on a routine basis. Both sets of executive leaders were presented with the results of a successful demonstration of the use and an opportunity to engage in a process to institutionalize the system. Since the models were built and demonstrated primarily and were pen-directed, institutionalization would involve a partnership process that would require seeking funds and support and taking steps to move the pen-shared management of the system to the full Head Start and city-directed management. We wanted to give it away. The school district and its Big Head Start program were beset by many political and economic pressures, like the recession. As a result, they suffered a series of challenges in executive leadership and lost many of the experienced Head Start leaders and teachers who were involved in the development and effective use of EPIC. Those who shared a vision of the institutionalization of EPIC district-wide. We wanted to replace the status quo of the system, which was actually the RCT comparison condition. Who wouldn't want to replace that? The added duress on the system had new incoming executive directors overwhelmed by the many Head Start and State Department of Education regulations and mandates. The leadership prioritized putting its energy into compliance with regulations for system stability and chose not to invest in a process to institutionalize EPIC. They didn't want to go into the ZPD with us. Though they wanted to use EPIC immediately, they felt they were not able to invest in a process, understandably, that was necessary to incorporate this integrated complex system well. Instead, the district purchased a widely used system of assessment and curriculum from a vendor and used the vendor to process their data for compliance reporting, EPIC-trained teachers were no longer permitted to use EPIC and had to use the single system for compliance purposes. The city leadership, in contrast, wanted to incorporate kids into city government and not be dependent on Penn, but work with Penn as a partner. They too had many political and economic pressures and lost staff, but some key leadership and staff remained that shared the will and the vision for kids and wanted to be a permanent part of the city and inform database decision making. In partnership, we got local foundation funding and engaged in a process of transferring control from Penn to the city. The IDS, which was formerly Kids, became a new city office. The developed integrated evidence-based data model that we developed for early childhood was institutionalized and routinely used. Bottom line, Kids grew up and is still growing amidst the tremendous political and economic pressures. EPIC did not. The truth for me was compliance to meet government regulations overwhelmed initiating a process to institutionalize. It was the tyranny of the urgent. Stability beat innovation. Will to enter a scaffolded process plus support made a way. No will, no support, no process, no way. What was our decade? We entered in a robust decade. That robust decade was developing and validating effective processes and incentive structures to institutionalize the use of an integrated data model, outcome model, to inform decisions making at the local and national. We were surprised by the national, I'll tell you in a minute, but we really went forward and we wanted to institutionalize kids into the city. It took us nearly a decade, but we pulled it off with our partners. Now, Kids is the data management office in the city, and we had responsibility for actually helping train and set that up, of which we're proud. It's now being used in Philadelphia for highly visible commissioned projects by all universities, not just Penn. And I'll tell you some of the ones that, of course, we think at Penn, we think the ones we're doing are the best, but we'll tell you that. And I want to give you a little bit of a picture of that. Then I want to tell you about very, very exciting how we entered into a process to actually create a nationalized, institutionalized system, which was really exciting. We didn't even imagine that would happen. We institutionalized the data model. Now, you got to understand what that means. Now we had a data model. We had a handful of data that were evidence-based and really kicked butt. We didn't have to figure out a million data models. We created the algorithms with the city for one data model to be used. Now this data model could be used routinely, easily, for whole cohorts of kids. Every cohort of kids, for every department can use this data model. And it could be used for cross-sectional studies, longitudinal studies. It was now institutionalized. Didn't require a lot of grant funding to actually assemble. It was now part of routine operation. We, Philadelphia, have an early childhood evidence-based data model that we can use for programming. It was really cool. And there were two projects that Penn engaged in. I'm most proud. I don't know if I have the impulse control. I may be running out of time, but I don't know if I have the impulse control not to tell you about this one. I don't have the impulse control. Okay, 15 minutes. I don't have the impulse control. I have 15 minutes. Okay, so I'm going to try. So this was the first time ever Mayor Nutter wanted a study on African American boys. So we had the first time ever of doing a longitudinal study, 0 to 8, on African American boys. Now, why did Mayor Nutter want a study? Because something was just released that the largest achievement gap in the city were between white boys and African American boys. Okay? So we said, okay, we're going to design a study. But now we're going to design a study hearing the voices of those parents from the first decade. Remember those voices? Don't exploit us, John. Kick butt. Okay. So what we did is we said, hey, okay, here's the achievement gap. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to take a really good look at the magnitude. Oh, here's the magnitude of the achievement gap. Let's take a look at the magnitude of the risk gap. Ooh, what we found, and I believe there is a God because of the way these data came out, people could accuse us of fudging the data, but the magnitude of the risk gap was the same size as the achievement gap. You see how that's poetry? We made visible, like, duh, look at this. These kids, it's steeper for these kids. That's why there's an achievement gap, you dummies. Okay? And then the mayor said, okay, we got to get to these agencies where this gap was on homelessness, on lead toxicity. Oh my gosh, the African American boys are way higher in prevalence than these others. What does that mean? It's where they're living. Let's get at this. So then the other thing we did and put into this study was a study on resilience. So we took a look at the African American boys who had 3 or more risks, and we found those boys that were proficient. Yay! 25% of those kids were proficient and had those 3 or more risks. So then we actually looked at what made them resilient. Well, we looked at the child level, the family level, and the community level. So we had kids, African American boys, no matter how many risks they had, who were more engaged academically and socially in the classroom, were proficient. Parents who were engaged in school and got their kids to school on a regular basis, attendance, they were buffered and proficient. Kids who had an early childhood, African American boys who had an early childhood experience, regardless of the quality, because we didn't know that, but if they had one, they were resilient. So we actually manifest strengths in the community, in the child, and in the family. And I was so proud of that. And I went much more than I wanted to say on that. But you can see my emotions getting the better of me. So we started a movement over the decades, making the city of Philadelphia pay attention to young children. Okay? We scared the bejesus out of them. We started telling them stuff. Mayor Kinney comes in, and what's his major platform? Universal pre-K. Praise the Lord. Universal pre-K. And now the question was, could the DMO, and I'm looking at some of the people who are, all the people who are involved in this are sitting in this room. I wish I could take credit for it, but I can't. The people in this room, we then went to the DMO. So here's Kinney. Kinney comes in and says, okay, we're going to have universal pre-K. That's what executive leaders do. Hey, Kinney, you got $60 million. It's going to take more than $500 million. You can't do universal pre-K. How are you going to make the decision? Are you going to make city councilmen beg and borrow and steal to get that money? No. We're going to use the data management office to help you make the decisions for that. So we made a plan. Now the question was, could we do this in real time to show our efficacy? We couldn't do it after, because that's what most research is done after people need it. We needed to do it in real time. So we got to it. We got the data model, and we now knew we now could actually take a look at an entire cohort, and we can find the kids with 2 or more risks, and we can find the density of neighborhoods where there are 2 or more risks. There you see it, right there, that picture. Then when we went to the state and got the state, we went to the state data and got data on the QRIS about the quality from the QRIS on the star 3 and star 4 facilities, and then marked them out. And then we had Penn, some dear souls at Penn, and some folks in the city calling all of these star 3 and star 4 places to find out if they had enrollment slots available. So we're able to map. That map is enrollment slots. The darker the color means neighborhoods with no slots available, no quality slots available. Then we crossed the 2. Oh my gosh. Again, this is poetry. This makes me sing. What we were able to do is cross the 2 data, and we have high-quality pre-K deserts. Those were the neighborhoods where there was high risk, the highest risk, and the lowest density of slots. Now, actionable intelligence. Mayor, you got $60 million. What do you want to do with the $60 million? Spend it wildly? No, the mayor said, I want to get reelected. No, the mayor said, we're going to use this. So we were right in time. We could actually now, they were creating the grants for how they were going to spend the $60 million. So we put in the grant, if you targeted one of these neighborhoods, you were going to get big plus stars. You were going to get really happy faces on your grant. Then we had the practitioners. We had the practitioners who had a legitimate right to contact these kids because they were in their caseload, calling parents up and telling them where the slots were. Oh, this is beautiful, isn't it? But it's data, you data nerds. It's data. Okay? And so now we're continuing the work. We're adding more databases because now we're real popular. The DMO is adding more databases. We're going to these data sets to mine 2-generational data because we want to look at moms and we want to look at fathers. There's a lot. We have the whole city's data. So we have prison records, we have depression, drug use, job employment. We have everything. So the question is, we want to mine that, and we also want to go back with our QRIS folks because we think the QRIS system has problems, and I won't say it sucks, but I'll say it has problems. And we want to actually take a look at it, and we want to look at family intervention and community intervention to see if we can promote those protective factors. While we were doing this, okay, when we finished decade 2, the MacArthur Foundation came to us and said, could you develop, we are interested in funding you developing a national process to institutionalize what you're doing here in Philadelphia nationally. And we said, oh, I'm sorry, we're too busy. We were like, oh. I was hurt that they didn't give me a Genius grant. It's okay. I was hurt. I was crushed. No, we were so excited. And so what we did is we developed, Dennis Colhane and I, who helped me develop kids, we developed a plan. And the plan was how we were going to create a process that will later, I'm going to tell you in a second, I call the Vygotsky test, how we were going to create a process to get there. Okay? We created that process. We identified national exemplary folks who were doing stuff like us, cities and states, who used our model and were doing things like us, but didn't know the others existed. So MacArthur gave us funding to create a network of these 8. Then we got money from MacArthur to study how they were doing what they were doing. Like, how did they do it? So we developed evidence about how they developed their system, because their system was economically and politically sustainable in their jurisdiction. How did they do it? Let's find the common practices across sites and use that intelligence to create a curriculum. So we did that. We used that intelligence to create the IDS approach. The IDS approach then generated a scope and sequence for a curriculum. And we're in the process of actually taking sites that want to go from data compliance to data decision making and helping them be that. So it's all about, right, unlocking the potential of this incredible millions and billions of information. Money that we're wasting all over the place. You wouldn't believe how much money we're wasting on collecting data that no one's using. How can we unlock it? How could we position integrated data models of use? Thank you, Christy. Needless to say, my wife always tells me I talk too much. How can we get state and local governments to have an engine and have good fuel? How can we make this major cultural shift? Well, we're doing it. We're doing it. It's very, very exciting. We have established a national network. We went from 8 municipalities in states to 15, and now we're up to 30. And this has been done in a decade. And so we're very, very excited. We have now 50% of the U.S. population in our network and learning communities. You get what that means? We got 50% of the U.S. population in our network of states and municipalities, like the largest cities and the most largest population centers in states, who could actually work together on early childhood. I mean, it's exciting. I can't wait till we start doing this. But it has been incredibly intense. Now it's time for us to heed Kierkegaard, because my clock is running low. We have to heed Kierkegaard, and we've got to turn and face, live forward. Yikes, it's scary. We've been looking backwards. Now we got to pivot and look at the realities down the road. Okay? I think the dimension of in Head Start is incredibly important. We have to help the national governance actually engage in engineering a major cultural shift in the use of integrated data outcome models. The other 2 dimensions are so cool. We got to help the third dimension, activate the other two dimensions, like what we've done in AISP. I call it the Vygotsky test and the relationship revolution. So I'm going to tell you that briefly, and then I'm going to stop talking, believe it or not. Okay, so what's the Vygotsky test? We know Vygotsky, a genius Russian guy. Why are we trashing the Russians? A genius guy, okay? We start with anyone who's an educator in this room takes the Vygotsky test all the time. We start with our mastery goal. Where do we want our student to be? Okay? You have to have an end game. You can't get there if you don't know where you're going. So what's the end game? The major cultural shift, we have to scaffold it. Move into a data culture. Use evidence-based child outcome data models. Integrate all the data models into a whole. Enter a process of institutionalization. Get to the self-actualization at the top, which is sustainable data-driven decision-making. How do we do that? Well, Vygotsky brings us right back to the supply. We got to go to the baseline. Where is your student really? Where is your student really? Right? Don't you start where your student is? How in the heck do you come up with a zone of proximal development if you don't know where your student is? Here, our student is the entire freaking field. We need to know where the programs are and where the field is. And I'm going to tell you, it doesn't look pretty. It doesn't look pretty. That's why I made you raise two hands. We're in this quadrant of high demand, low supply. We're conducting data inventories now because Head Start programs know what we're doing, and they say, can you give us an MRI on our data use? Because we want to move into this culture. So we've created a process called data inventories. Like in the ASPE world, we created readiness studies so you can tell whether or not you're ready to enter into our curriculum. Well, we've done some readiness studies of major Head Start programs. It ain't pretty. So some of them, 80 forms, they collect 80 forms per family with over 200 data elements, and less than 15% of them are digitized in a vendor's database that they have to ask for. We asked the professional staff, how do they feel about what they're collecting? Only a third of them feel that their intervention data are useful, and half of them feel their outcome data are not useful. Oh my gosh. But again, what do we do as educators? We don't disparage where our students are. We teach them, right? We teach them. We're doing a large study with Burroughs Katie Bargehouse is leading a study with the mental measurement yearbook? It's one of the most exhaustive evaluations of measurements in the world. We partnered with them, and we're looking at their early child. I won't tell you why we partnered with them. You'll get me talking about the 2008 National Academy of Sciences study on early childhood assessment, which will make me very ill. I won't talk to you about that. Maybe we can talk about that later, or someone can ask me a question, why that study makes me very ill. But there are 400 early childhood measures that are carefully evaluated by independent evaluators in the mental measurement yearbook. Only 7% of them have validity on all the validity standards in the Educational and Psychological Handbook of Standards for Validity. 7% of the 400. Guess what validities suck the most? They make perfect sense. Our parents told us this decades ago. Response process validity. We're disregarding our respondents. We're doing to our respondents, not responding with them. Response process validity sucks, okay? And consequential validity sucks. What's the use of the measure? So we err on the respondent relationships, and we err on the consequences. And the multidimensional measures, oh my gosh. The multidimensional measures, are they using multi-criteria factor analysis or even more sophisticated multi-level factoring? No. You know what's the most largest thing they're using to determine a dimension of a factor? Cronbach alpha. That's a sin. That's a sin. So obviously we got to get to the middle. Vygotsky is getting to the middle, right? So what's in the middle? Scaffolded supply and demand in the zone of proximal development. What do we do for our students? This is what we did for AISP. Foster engagement and confident risk-taking in the zone of proximal development. Create a curriculum to scaffold to mastery goal. set up dynamic, collaborative learning communities, recognize and celebrate mastery. In AISP, if you finish the curriculum, you join the network. If you fail the curriculum, you don't join the network. So there's an accomplishment involved. So what have we done? We've created 2 tracks for the field. And I'm not going to talk, I'm going to get the hook pretty soon. But I want to tell you that we have to have, at the program level and at the field level, this is what we've done in AISP, is we created these 2 tracks. First, you inventory readiness, and you look at data literacy of staff on the program level. Then you have a national laboratory of exemplars who are helping you create the curriculum. Then you create a curriculum and institute the curriculum. The ASPE curriculum is 18 months. And actually, there's some wonderful people who are in that curriculum now here in the audience that they could actually tell you how much it sucks. But then what you do is you implement and evaluate the curriculum. You do this in learning communities, not go and pay people consultation. You do it in learning communities. Why? Because relationships are powerful. Remember Vygotsky? Now, what do we do at the field? At the field, what we do is we take a look at all the sucky things we have, and we evaluate them. Why does the FDA tell you don't take this drug, but the DHHS says, oh yeah, you do whatever you want? We should basically find out these measures that suck and get them off the market. We should find out these curriculum that aren't doing anything and get them off the market, or actually give people funds to make them better. We should prioritize what we need to do for development and tell Congress, don't do some stupid National Academy of Science study, actually build measures and build things we need for our data models. Invest in our children. Partner with local funders, vendors, whoever will partner with us, partner with them. And then have a robust, continuous quality research and design activity that can actually feed the learning communities with newly developed innovation. Because last decade's work is going to be poor. We need a continual process of quality improvement. Okay, what are the 3 most important things we learned about institutionalized use? Relationships, relationships, relationships. And I'm going to tell you the good news and bad news about relationships. I'm 65 years old. I've had a lot of them. And you know one of the things I found out? People are the problem. In relationships, I've never had a problem in a relationship if there wasn't a person creating the problem. People are the problem. They really are a problem. And people who are not from your cultural niche, researchers, are more of a problem. Because those executive leaders don't get it. Those practitioners don't get it. The public doesn't know what it wants. They're the problem. But I'm going to tell you another incredible reality, is that people are the solution. People are the solution for the people problems. People are the problem and the solution. Go figure. So it means that relationships are indispensable to innovation and progress, which means in AISP, we configure this as a diamond with the 4 major contributors. At the top, at the apex, is executive leadership. They rule. They have the money, they have the budget, and they control the law. They rule. Okay? They have to be at the top. And then the vertical axis is basically the people who benefit. They're the most important. Horizontal axis is the knowing community and the doing community. Okay? But here's what it typically looks like with no relationship. Okay? No relationship. Mandates, compliance, and doo-doo. Where are the researchers? They ain't in the picture. They're not embedded in the picture. They kind of come in and say, could you give me permission? Could I have your cooperation? Will you sign these papers? And then when they're, where did they go? We need a whole learning system. Almost done, Christy. I'm at 1 minute. We need a whole learning system. We have to do research at each corner of the diamond to figure out how we can do research differently, how we can, and we're doing this in AISP, we just need to do it in Head Start. How can we get the gears moving together? We need a revolution, a relationship revolution. Our path forward, data culture, evidence-based data models, integrated evidence-based data models, institutionalize them. How do we get forward? We pass the Vygotsky test. We enter a relationship revolution. Realistic understanding of supply and demand, scaffolded mastery based on working in the zone of proximal development, learning communities, innovative collaborations. Why do we need to get this right? Remember these dear souls I showed you in the beginning of this talk? They were in our first study. These three boys, the two youngest ones were in Head Start. The other one was in elementary school. They're three brothers. They came into our study with more than 3 risk factors, and their mom was significantly challenged. But the moms who got in our face said, make sure you give her a job. We gave her first job. She got into our study. We gave her our first job. She kicked butt. She made tremendous contributions in our study. The kids were incredibly resilient. They had a wonderful Head Start experience. And you know what? Here they are 30 years later. They're in our community. They all graduated from college. They're all in their 30s, and they're kicking butt, making major contributions in our community. And that mom who we gave a job, she's a pastor in a major church in North Philadelphia. She has her own YouTube channel. Stay plugged in. Yes, we do. Stay plugged in. So there are these wonderful stories of Head Start. There's so many of them. There's so many beautiful lives for us to touch. So many of them that we can have these outcomes, the same outcomes for these 3 brothers. Evie's there. Evie, Papa, will you keep working to get it right? Will we keep working to get it right? We have to answer Evie. And the answer is yes, Evie. You know why, Evie? Because we love each one. And each one, all of them are our kind. Thank you.
So we have, is this on? Yeah? Okay. We have about 5 minutes, 7 minutes maybe, for questions, and there's a microphone there. Sometimes people don't like to get up and walk over to the microphone. So if you have a question and you raise your hand, I will bring the microphone to you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So I'm a Head Start graduate, and I'm over the data program at Head Start in New Orleans. And so my question to you is, I noticed toward the end you said, how do you move this process into Head Start? So what ideas do you have to move this into Head Start?
Okay, that's a really good question. So remember what I said at the diamond? What's at the top of the diamond? The executive leadership. Remember I said the engineering process is in Head Start? So we really, really need to get and think about how we can help. And I say help, not blame or point fingers. Because remember that ball is a real big ball that was being pushed up the hill? This is really hard work. My students say, I've stopped talking about projects, now I talk about decades. And I think what we need to do is we need to come together. We need a revolution of our research. We need embedded researchers to say, we're here for our community for a decade. Money or not, we're here, and we're going to work. And this is what this college Head Start graduate is telling us, is that, okay, it's get it done, it's like get it done. It's like the economy's stupid. It's like get it done. We got to get it done. And the getting it done is going to be at that relationship level. I'm really excited because I feel like we were supported very well by the MacArthur Foundation and the Casey Foundation and the Arnold Foundation to actually show this way. Now, this way wasn't a Head Start way, but it was an institutional way of moving from a no data culture to a data culture. That's a big cultural shift. If you're collecting on every family 80 paper forms that go into filing cabinets for your triennial review, and you have over 200 data elements that no one's using for nothing, and only access to 12% of them, and problematic with quality, that's the diagnosis. Now we need to provide the treatment. And we're trying to create a model, because you have to create models. So we're working with folks, and I believe that the University of Pennsylvania has a moral responsibility to be working with folks and not asking them to pay for the work that we're doing. Because I have a job, and they shouldn't be paying us for doing. But the issue is we want to do this on a national level. We want to create a national model. I'm going to tell you 3 things, my dear friend. I have 5 things I talk about that are necessary for success. 5. There are 3 commons and there are 2 uncommons. And I believe the answer is in the 2 uncommons. The 3 commons are, we all share in this room a common purpose. We saw your hands go up. A common purpose. The data models are the common language and the common procedures that are necessary to get the job done. The data are the common language. The interventions are the common procedures. Now, what are the uncommons in my story today? There are 2 uncommons. Hopefully you heard it took uncommon leadership to have courage to enter the zone of proximal development. Uncommon leadership that said, we have a vision and we're going to move forward. Uncommon leadership. I don't think we have common leadership. We need uncommon leadership. What's the other uncommon? Uncommon collaboration. How do we get practitioners, executive leaders, and the community and the researchers embedded in caring for the children at the center? I think we can do it. I know we can do it. I've seen demonstrations of it. I'd like to, I don't know, they can't bring me back. I'll be off the planet pretty soon. But the point is, we have, you guys, your generation, the next generation. You guys, remember we said, of the 2 W's, what really trumps? Will and way. What one are you going to vote for? Will, please. Because where there's a will, there's a what? A way. And I really feel we need a collective will in order to go forward. It can't be, and I'm telling you right now, the researchers are not going to lead the way. I'm telling you right now, that's why I go to Head Start. We're so used to being at the apex of the diamond, and maybe this is true confessions. I'm being broadcast now. I'll probably get killed by the researcher union. But I think we are very privileged in what we do, and we have people who will give us money to do, and we do really good stuff. But remember I told you that no matter what you do, my Vita is filled with useless things. My Vita is filled with things that are wonderful that no one is using. I don't want a Vita like that. I want 2 or 3 things. If my 3 decades were only about the lives of those 3 boys, I could die and go to my grave in peace. So that's where we've got to center our attention. And I think it's a relationship revolution. And I think we have to have leadership at the top. You know, it's top down and bottom up. So we're part of the bottom up. It's easy when you're 5'2" to be part of the bottom up. But we cannot be blaming people. We've got to say, everyone, like that dear soul did to me, everyone is our kind. And we have to embrace a collaboration. Because for those little people, that's why I had Evie. I want you to have Ghost of Evie in your mind. I have Evie saying, get it right. We got to get it right. Because these kids aren't going to wait for us. So we got to create a momentum and a trajectory where we're working together, passing the Vygotsky test. I feel so badly for a lot of Head Start programs because they've got a lot of demand. We got a waiver of all the requirements to do EPIC. Wouldn't that be cool? That if we could actually create laboratories and create waivers and create learning communities connected to those laboratories, maybe it will be our time and our form of our beloved Martin Luther King's dream, that we could have people with dreams for our Head Start kids. But you've got to come to the mic often and regular to ask that question, and ask that question of your congressmen and your executive leaders. I thank you. I have the easiest email in the world. It's really easy. johnf@upenn.edu. How easy could that be? John. I don't have a Jonathan, fancy Jonathan. I'm just plain John. johnf@upenn.edu. If there's anything I said that moved you or stirred you and you want to talk with me, I'm at your disposal. I'll follow through with you. If there's, I've sent a list of research articles from my CV related to the talk. You'll get that. That'll be posted on the website. But we've got to come together. We've really got to come together, and it's time now, right? You saw those hands? You saw those hands before? You're the people to do it. You're the people to do it. You love Head Start. You know that we can do a better job, and you know it ain't going to be easy. So you're willing to enter the zone of proximal development with support. Okay? Thank you so much.